free.
Welcome back to The Quiet Fire. I'm Jayne, and today we arrive at a conversation that may be the most important of this entire series. Not hormones, not hot flushes, not brain fog, not weight gain, not relationships. Today, we're talking about the relationship that underpins every other relationship you will ever have. The one with yourself. Today's episode is called Self-Compassion, Healing, and Learning How to Build a Life that Nourishes rather than Depletes. And if you are anything like me, you may have spent much of your life believing that being hard on yourself was somehow helpful. That self-criticism was motivation. That pushing through exhaustion was strength. That saying yes when you wanted to say no was kindness. That carrying everybody else's emotional baggage was love. And that rest had to be earned. If any of that sounds familiar, pour yourself a cup of tea, settle in, and know you are among friends. Because menopause has a funny way of exposing unsustainable truths. It is rather like your body turning up at a board meeting, kicking open the door, throwing several decades of accumulated nonsense onto the table and announcing, "We need to talk." And honestly, it has a point. Because many women arrive at menopause physically depleted, emotionally exhausted, spiritually disconnected, and wondering why they feel so flat despite having spent years doing everything they were told would make them happy. Career, family, responsibilities, achievement, caregiving, productivity, more productivity, and then perhaps a little extra productivity just in case. Meanwhile, the nervous system is quietly waving a white flag from somewhere in the background. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about self-compassion. Because it is often misunderstood. Many people hear the term and imagine scented candles, positive affirmations, and somebody gently stroking a rescue rabbit while saying, "I am enough." And while there is nothing wrong with any of those things, self-compassion is actually far more practical and scientifically grounded than many people realize. Research led by psychologist Kristen Neff has shown that self-compassion is associated with lower anxiety, lower depression, improved resilience, greater emotional regulation, and better overall well-being. Interestingly, people who practice self-compassion are often more motivated, not less. Why? Because shame is a terrible long-term motivator. Imagine trying to encourage a friend through a difficult period by constantly telling her she's failing. You wouldn't. Yet many of us speak to ourselves in ways we would never dream of speaking to someone we love. Self-compassion asks a very simple question. What if you offered yourself the same kindness you offer everybody else? Now, for some women, that question feels revolutionary, and for others, it feels mildly offensive. Because many of us were raised to believe self-sacrifice was a virtue. Particularly women. We became experts at anticipating needs, managing emotions, keeping the peace, holding families together, remembering birthdays, buying Christmas presents, finding lost school uniforms, scheduling appointments, and somehow knowing where the batteries are. Always. I don't know how women became the official global custodians of batteries, but here we are. Yet what happens when the person caring for everyone else never receives the same care in return? Eventually, depletion. And science has something to say about that too. The human body was never designed to remain in a prolonged state of stress. When stress becomes chronic, cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods. Over time, this can affect sleep, immunity, digestion, inflammation, mood, memory, cardiovascular health, and emotional well-being. Many women enter menopause already carrying years, sometimes decades, of accumulated stress. Then hormonal fluctuations arrive and suddenly the coping mechanisms that once worked no longer do. It's not because women become weaker. It's because the margin has disappeared. The reserve tank is empty. The body is asking for a different way of living. Author and researcher Brené Brown famously said, "Talk to yourself like someone you love." Simple, beautiful, and surprisingly difficult. Because healing often begins not with changing the world around us, but with changing the conversation happening inside our own heads. Now let's talk about healing. And I want to be very clear here. Healing is not becoming perfect. Healing is not becoming endlessly positive. Healing is not floating through life dressed entirely in beige linen while drinking herbal tea and never getting annoyed by other human beings. If you achieve that, please let me know your secret. Healing is becoming more whole. more aware, more honest, more present, more able to respond rather than react, more able to meet yourself where you are rather than constantly demanding that you be somewhere else. And neuroscience offers us something hopeful here. The brain retains its ability to change throughout life. This is called neuroplasticity. New neural pathways can form. New habits can develop. New emotional responses can be learned. Which means your past may shape you, but it does not have to imprison you. The nervous system can heal. The brain can adapt. Patterns can change. Not overnight. Not magically. But gradually. Consistently. Compassionately. And perhaps one of the most important questions menopause invites us to ask is this: what in my life nourishes me? Not distracts me. Not numbs me. Not impresses other people. Nourishes me. There is a difference. Scrolling social media for 3 hours while eating biscuits may feel comforting in the moment. Ask me how I know. But nourishment is something deeper. It leaves you feeling restored rather than drained. For one woman that may be painting. For another it may be gardening. For another it may be walking along the coast. Reading. Dancing. Writing. Prayer. Meditation. Laughter. Music. Friendship. Creativity. Silence. Nourishment is deeply personal. And one of the most beautiful things I see happen during menopause is women slowly rediscovering what nourishes them. Not what they should enjoy. What they actually enjoy. There is a quote from Mary Oliver that I return to often. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What a magnificent question. Because somewhere between paying bills, raising children, supporting partners, caring for parents, maintaining careers, and surviving the endless parade of responsibilities life brings, many women lose contact with that question entirely. Menopause often places it back in front of us. Not aggressively, but persistently. What do you want? What matters? What brings joy? What feels meaningful? What needs to end? What needs to begin? And sometimes the answers are surprisingly small. A slower morning, a boundary, a hobby, an hour alone, a walk, a nap without guilt. Honestly, the older I get, the more a nap feels like a luxury cruise. But small things matter. Because a nourishing life is rarely built through grand gestures. It is built through daily choices. Tiny acts of self-respect repeated consistently. A little more rest. A little less self-criticism. A little more honesty. A little less people-pleasing. A little more joy. A little less guilt. And over time those small shifts become transformation. Now before we finish today, I want to speak directly to the woman listening who feels exhausted. The woman who has spent years carrying responsibilities nobody else even notices. The woman who is trying so hard to keep everything together. The woman who feels guilty whenever she prioritizes herself. I want you to hear this. You are not a machine. You are not an endless resource. You are not here solely to meet everybody else's needs. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to build a life that supports you as much as you support everyone else. And perhaps that is one of menopause's greatest lessons. Not how to endure, but how to nourish. Not how to sacrifice, but how to sustain. Not how to become someone else, but how to finally come home to yourself. Thank you for joining me today on The Quiet Fire. I hope you leave this conversation with a little more gentleness toward yourself than you arrived with. A little less pressure. A little more permission. Permission to rest. Permission to heal. Permission to take up space. Permission to build a life that nourishes rather than depletes. Because perhaps menopause is not teaching us how to become stronger. Perhaps it is teaching us how to become kinder to ourselves. And maybe, after a lifetime of carrying so much, that is the lesson we needed all along. Next time, in the final episode of this series, we'll be bringing everything together as we explore the reclaimed woman, thriving beyond menopause. We'll talk about what happens after the storm begins to settle. We'll explore the science of healthy aging, longevity, resilience, movement, brain health, purpose, and vitality. We'll discuss why some researchers now describe postmenopausal women as entering one of the most psychologically powerful stages of life. And we'll ask a question that lies at the heart of this entire journey. What becomes possible when a woman stops trying to return to who she was and begins embracing who she is becoming? Until then, be gentle with yourself. The quiet fire within you was never asking you to burn out. It was asking you to shine.
The quiet fire, rewriting the menopause story.